If you're trying to decide whether a marshland is a smart place to survive a zombie apocalypse, start by imagining your feet sinking 6 inches into cold mud before you even finish the thought. Good, you're now in the right mindset. Marshlands are the kind of terrain that make even zombies pause, mostly because they can't lift their legs high enough to clear the muck. That's your first tactical advantage right there. The terrain hates everyone equally. It hates zombies slightly more. Still, before we start celebrating the swamp as some natural undead filtration system, remember that it also hates you, and it's much better at wearing you down than zombies are. The structural reality of marsh terrain is simple: unstable substrate. Shallow water layers, tangled vegetation, inconsistent footing, and humidity thick enough to qualify as a choking hazard. It's a place where every step requires micro-calculations. Step on something too soft, you sink. Step on something too solid. It's probably a submerged log hosting a colony of leeches planning your downfall. But from a survival logic perspective, the marsh offers immediate benefits. It naturally slows enemies, muffles visibility, and turns movement into a punishment. Zombies don't do well with punishment that requires coordination. They shuffle, they sink, they get stuck, and they stay stuck. Watching a zombie become a permanent lawn ornament is one of the few joys you'll get out there. Consider it environmental comedy relief. Yet, the swamp's generosity is deceptive. The moment you decide this is safe, the mosquitoes arrive. Thousands, millions. Enough to make you question your will to live long before the undead do. They don't care about your tactical gear, your survival plan, or your dreams. They see you as a hot, sweaty protein bar. And if the bugs don't get you, the bacteria will. Marsh water is essentially a broth of microorganisms, plant rot, animal waste, and things you don't want to think about. Hydration becomes a puzzle. You're drowning in water, yet dying of thirst. Classic apocalypse irony. Still, the marsh rewards smart infrastructure. High ground platforms, even crude ones, buy you dryness, visibility, and less insect exposure. A small raised base built with scavenged logs, bound reeds, or salvaged planks can create a stable zone in an otherwise liquid world. No need for walls. Nature will slow intruders more effectively than any fence. If a zombie somehow reaches your perimeter without face-planting into sludge, you'll hear it long before it reaches you. Marshes amplify splashes but hide visuals. Audio becomes your main detection system. That's both a strength and a psychological torture device. Try sleeping peacefully when every frog croak sounds like a moan. Now consider the threats beyond zombies. Snakes, gators, boars, creatures that thrived long before humans argued over canned soup expiration dates. These animals don't care about your survival arc. They see you as noise, competition, or in the worst case, calories. And unlike zombies, they don't advertise themselves with groans. Their approach is an educational experience in humility. The terrain itself deserves a hazard rating. Fog reduces your vision radius to a small fuzzy bubble. Sound travels unevenly, bouncing between trees and water surfaces. You hear movement but never know the direction. You hear splashes but can't tell depth. You hear groans but can't identify distance. The marsh becomes one big, echoing, soggy mystery box. If you're someone who enjoys constant uncertainty, congratulations, you've found paradise. For everyone else, it's tension plus cardio. Still, with all these hazards, the marsh has tactical elegance. Every risk is paired with a counter-benefit. Soft terrain stops zombies, but slows you. Abundant water threatens infection, but offers fishing, trapping, and reed harvesting. Dense vegetation blocks line of sight, but provides camouflage. The swamp is a symphony of strengths and weaknesses, and your survival depends on whether you can use the environment faster than it uses you. The psychology of early marsh survival is simple. You're overwhelmed. Too much movement, too much noise, too much moisture, too many invisible teeth in the water. But once you adapt once, your brain switches into swamp mode. You begin to understand it. You learn where the ground holds. You sense danger by ripple patterns instead of silhouettes. You adjust to humidity as a permanent body layer. You feel the marsh like an extension of your awareness. That's the turning point when the swamp stops trying to kill you and starts letting you borrow space to exist. Temporarily, by the time night falls and fog drapes across the water like a horror film filter, you realize something. Marshland survival is possible. Brutal, inconvenient, itchy, and often humiliating, but possible. The terrain buys you time. The environment protects you. And the undead, well, most of them become part of the scenery. Whether that scenery comforts you or terrifies you depends on how well you handle damp socks, sudden splashes, and the sound of something moving just slightly too slowly to be human. Once you've established your first elevated shelter and accepted that every part of your body will be wet forever, the second phase of marshland survival begins. This is where strategy matters more than courage, because courage doesn't purify water or keep your ankles attached when something bites. The survival logic framework: shelter, water, food, defense gets reshuffled in marsh terrain. Shelter rises to priority 1 because wet living equals infections, and infections equal game over. Your base must be elevated, stable, and strategically boring. Boring means hidden. Boring means low smoke fires. Boring means no loud celebrations after successfully catching a fish. The swamp doesn't like show-offs. Water purification becomes a constant project. Boiling is ideal, but fuel is scarce because dry wood in a marsh is about as common as optimistic people during an apocalypse. You'll use filtration, layer sand, charcoal, reed fibers, then boil when you can. Every sip you drink is a tiny victory against the microbiological army plotting your downfall. Food supply is manageable, but labor-intensive. Fish traps work well if you understand current flow. Frogs provide protein if you can tolerate their texture, which at this point should feel normal since everything in the marsh has a suspicious texture. Edible plants like cattail roots and water chestnuts are reliable, but require digging, washing, and a strong stomach. Hunting animals is not ideal. Anything large enough to chase is also large enough to retaliate. And if you wound a wild animal in the marsh, congratulations, you've summoned every predator within 2 kilometers. Defense strategy in marshlands flips the usual apocalypse script. Instead of building fortifications, you manipulate environment. You reroute movement paths. You exploit deeper mud pockets. You create noise traps, floating reeds tied to strings that slap the water when disturbed. You place decoys to mislead silhouettes. Survival becomes a quiet chess match with nature and undead pieces that occasionally fall over mid-move. Close-range combat is a terrible idea. Mud ruins your footing. Water slows your swings, and zombies have no issue falling forward because they don't mind landing face first in gunk. Spears become practical. Long reach, low noise, minimal splash. A simple thrust creates distance. A misstep creates a tragedy. You're always one bad skid away from a comedy death the swamp would certainly find hilarious. Firearms are limited-use tools. Humidity corrodes mechanisms. Sound draws everything. And ammunition sinks when dropped forever. You keep a gun for emergencies, but rely on physical tactics. Distance, misdirection, terrain exploitation. The swamp is your weapon. You are merely the trigger. Movement strategy becomes almost ritualistic. You avoid straight lines because the swamp punishes predictability. You memorize safe stepping points. You travel during moments of low visibility, not because it's safe, but because it's equally unsafe for everything else. In the marsh, symmetrical disadvantage is a form of balance. Psychologically, marsh survival is a pressure cooker. The soundscape is oppressive, buzzing, dripping, croaking, moaning. Every noise sounds like a threat until your brain adapts. Once it does, silence becomes the real alarm. Humidity drains energy. The landscape never changes enough to feel progress. Days blend. nights stretch. Your perception of time warps. You begin marking moments by the number of leeches you remove from your legs. When you start giving them names, that's when you know you've been in the swamp too long. Still, as weeks pass, you develop marsh awareness. You distinguish wind-driven ripples from movement ripples. You locate dead zones where visibility improves. You use fog to mask silhouette outlines. Your tactics sharpen because they must. You're no longer fighting the swamp. You're negotiating with it. A quiet, uneasy treaty. The marsh protects you from zombies, but taxes you heavily fatigue, paranoia, strategic fatigue. Survival here becomes less about defeating threats and more about managing constant inconvenience. Eventually, you realize the final truth. The marsh isn't good or bad. It's indifferent, calmly destructive, quietly protective, consistently uncomfortable. It keeps you alive only because it's too difficult for anything else to reach you. You survive not because you're strong, but because everything around you is slightly weaker, slower, or stuck waist-deep somewhere behind you. If that sounds like a win, then yes, the marshlands are good. If that sounds miserable, then absolutely it's bad. But in the zombie apocalypse, misery with a high survival probability still counts as success, at least until the mosquitoes unionize.